Alright, welcome back to Crafting Florida. Today we are going to make a bookcase. I'm going to show you a simple way to make a nice, strong, sturdy bookcase that you can put in your house for extra storage, for all your books, your pictures, whatever you need. Very simple, open shelving style bookcase. Let's jump in. Alright, so I was able to get my hands on some 10-foot plywood. If you've done anything with plywood, you know that most of the time it comes in 4x8 sheets, but I need a 9-foot bookcase, so I got some 10-foot plywood. We're going to cut it down to 9 feet and get it ready to put the dados in. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to map out where we want our shelves. So, I've done the math on this. It's about a 9-foot bookcase. I want as many 12-inch shelves as I can, but I'm also going to add an extra shelf by going shorter on the top couple shelves. Key thing when you are doing that, make sure you are taking into account the thickness of the wood itself. If you do the math and you forget to subtract the thickness of the wood, you're going to mess up your calculation. So, I've done the math. I'm going to go ahead and mark some lines here on the top and bottom of my 3/4 inch shelving material. This is going to give me some lines to cut off of. What I'm going to do, I'm going to set up my track saw, cut the inside of the top and bottom lines for each shelf, and then I will come back with a router and clean out the middle. And that way, I will have dados for all my shelves to sit in, which will add a lot of strength to this bookcase. Bookcases tend to bow in the middle if you don't have enough support on them, so by dadoing the shelves in, I'm also going to put dados on the face frame so the shelves will have support in the front as well. Much support for these shelves as possible so we have no bowing over time after loading these bookcases up with a bunch of books. Those squiggly lines are just a reminder to myself that that's the part that needs to go. Make sure to cut inside those lines, not on the outside. So let's get the tracks all set up. Okay, so we're going to set this track saw up on the insides of all these lines. The reason we're doing that is because we don't want to cut outside of those lines. Those lines, like I mentioned, are the thickness of our shell. If we cut outside or even on those lines, our dado is going to be too wide and the shells are going to be wiggling around in there. You want to make sure that you're cutting inside. That way it's nice and clean. The reason we're using that track saw is so that we don't get any tear out when we push our router through. So we're going to set our router to the right depth, make sure that our track is perfectly straight. I'm checking the distance from the track to the first cut line on both ends so that I know that I'm pushing this router straight across the board. Once we get that all set, we can put the router on there and start working our way through. Make sure you're keeping pressure down and against that track, because if you aren't careful, you'll get a little bit of tear out. And that's the whole point of us using that track saw before, was so we don't get any tear out. When you finish it off, you get that nice clean dado, perfect width, ready for your shelving. Now you just got to repeat that for every single shelf. Double check your measurements every time. Make sure your clamps are on there nice and tight, and you should be able to push everything through nice and cleanly and get some nice clean dados for your shelving. This is going to allow extra support. Now you're getting nice sturdy support on both sides of the shelf. Now I'm making 2 bookcases, so I'm now going to take this and rip it down to the width or the depth of the bookcase. I'm only going to be about 12 inches deep, which is pretty standard for a bookcase. But now I have all these dados lined up exactly on both bookcases, so nice level shelving all the way across, plenty of support. Also need to rip down the plywood for the shelves and the top. Then we'll move over to the miter saw station. We're going to cut these shelves down to size. I obviously set up a stop block because I'm cutting a whole bunch of shelves the same width, and so it helps to just go ahead, set something up where I can slide that piece over and cut it, slide it and cut it. Lots of repeatable movements here. Jigs are very important if you need to repeat something and it needs to be exact. If you're pulling a tape measure 10, 12 times, you're bound to be off maybe, a 32nd of an inch or a 16th of an inch. When you're cutting it over and over again, if you have a solid stop block or something like that, you're going to be more accurate over the course of a bunch of cuts. Then we're going to move on to the face frame. The face frame, we need to rip down some poplar to the appropriate width. There's a whole bunch going into this bookcase because you've got the face frame, a piece on the left, a piece on the right, top, all the shelves, and a bottom plate. The bottom plate needs to be wide enough for baseboard to go on it because they want the baseboard to be put in there. So a whole bunch of poplar getting ripped down. 1.5 inches is a pretty standard width when it comes to the face frames, so that's what we're going with here. I added some nailers to the back so we had support on the back of the shelf, and then obviously we have to be able to attach it to the wall somehow. So we put those in there as well. Pocket holes, a little bit of glue, pretty simple stuff. But that it's going to also add a little bit of support on the back end of the shelf because these are obviously getting tied into the wall as well. Drive those screws in and they are plenty supported. Then we're going to cut those rabbets for our base frames. I need to make sure my dado stack is just a hair above the thickness of the 3/4 inch plywood, and then I can run that thing through. We're going to cut just about 1/4 of an inch into it on this rabbet, and that's going to make sure that we get a nice clean sit. There's going to be a little bit of support. The glue will hold it all together. I run it through twice because that first one, sometimes you get a little bit of bump or something, a little bit hard to push it through. That second pass through is going to make sure it's nice and clean and that your plywood sits smoothly in there. Then put that face frame together. Glue, pocket holes, does the job. Nothing wrong with that. Glue is going to be the majority of the support there, but the pocket holes hold it all in place. Saves you a bunch of time. Nobody's ever going to see those pocket holes unless they're sticking their head back behind the bookcase for some reason. So get that put together. Our rabbit's also in the outside part of the face frame, so we are going to glue that whole thing to the bookcase. It should slide right in place. You see it does that nice and smoothly. Some brad nails holds it until the glue dries. And when it's paint grade, it's very simple to go ahead and add those nails because the nails can easily be filled and covered with paint. You'll never know they're there. Sometimes it needs a little extra help to get in place. That's what the clamp and the rubber mallet are for. It gets the job done. Then we can dry fit our shelves, making sure everything fits nicely. We'll tap it in. You want this to be snug, but it needs to be able to move. And I was very happy with the fit. Need a little love getting in there, but that's what we wanted. This again is a dry fit. I came back and added glue off camera. Then all we got to do is fill all those nail holes. I'm a fan of the spackling. I feel like it works a little bit better, it doesn't shrink. As long as you sand it or use a wet rag to wipe off that excess, you get a nice clean finish. Then we spray it. You see I've got a couple of panels there, the MDF panels. Those are going to be our back panels. I like to add those on site because it's just a lot easier to move this thing around, being able to grab the back versus once you put that back panel on, it gets a little bit more cumbersome to work with. So get it installed and the customer's very happy. Great project. Hopefully you guys try it. If you like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button.